In a typical church, discussions about heavier matters might be the subject for a session in the pastor's study. This is true even in the catacomb chapel of St. Uriel, no matter how different our ministries might be from your typical parish. And let's see what we might find in a very different pastor's study.
Merry meet, blessed be, and welcome to another session, finally again, in a very different pastor's study. Yeah, we're back. And I want to say that we're going to be back to stay. I'd like to think so. And I'm bringing back a few other things too. And I'm rather excited right now about some of the stuff I've been finding, exploring, and it just seems to all come together ever so nicely to back up something that I've been saying all along. Where's the dispute? I noticed that some of the more enlightened Catholic saints of recent time have kind of taken that line. Padre Pio of Pietrelcina was known to say, "I'm here for everyone." And the only criticism he had for one Wiccan lady who used tarot cards was that he didn't think she needed them. And yeah, once you develop your meditation and that sort of thing, certain other things you don't need quite as much anymore. So that follows, you know? The only group that Padre Pio had objection to was one in particular. I won't name them here, but he didn't like them and he had no sympathy for them. But all the others, no problem. And, well, so many others. Thomas Merton, for instance, was a very good friend of the Dalai Lama. And some of his books on Eastern religions are downright spectacular. So we have this question of where in the heck is the argument? And can we find a basis for it? Well, as a matter of fact, yes. Glastonbury in England. Let me tell you something about Glastonbury. When Gregory the Great sent Bishop Augustine, not the St. Augustine who was the repentant sinner of many years, no, this was a Benedictine monk who had been a bishop and an abbot, and he got sent over to become Archbishop of Canterbury and established Canterbury Cathedral. Augustine of Canterbury arrived in 597 AD, and when he and his people started going around and finding out who their neighbors are, and they started talking about Christ and Jesus, and a lot of the people said, yeah, we know that, and as a matter of fact, some of them said, yeah, we do too. Yes, there was already a Christian church in England, Anglia, if you will. I kind of like that term because of a story about Pope Gregory that I don't know that I'm going to go into right here. But in Britain there was already a Christian church. And it didn't have anything to do with Rome. Rome didn't even know that these people existed. How could that be? Well, Jesus had a bunch of apostles. Besides the 12 disciples, there were many more. And they started scattering just about as soon after the crucifixion as they felt it was safe to get out of town. One of those is said to have been Joseph of Arimathea. And he came with the Holy Grail and with a staff that had been given to him by Jesus. And when he got to Canterbury, he put that staff in the ground and said, "Here we are." And the staff began to bloom. And if you look up Glastonbury thorn, the current tree that has that title, is that tree? Well, it's actually from cuttings that came from the original tree, so yeah, you could still say it's still the same tree. Cuttings, not seeds. And it's rather special for a number of reasons. But yes, Joseph of Arimathea. Now, when would he have gotten there? Well, it would have definitely been after 33 AD, and probably well before AD 70, when the big riots and the destruction of the temple happened in Jerusalem. So, also, considering how advanced Joseph of Arimathea was among the Sanhedrin, the rulers of the Jewish people, he probably was doing this, well, certainly a fair amount of time before AD 70, more likely around AD 40 or 50, somewhere around there. It was fairly easy to travel in the Roman Empire. We have documented evidence showing that Thomas went to India. And we've also got some other thoughts on this. In the Bible, you'll find the finding in the temple, where Jesus, who apparently was just old enough to have passed his bar mitzvah, was meeting with the elders in the temple. They don't say why, but I've discussed this with a number of people who understand the process, and they say that this was probably an examination to become a rabbi. And he was doing well. As a matter of fact, he was doing stupendously well. And he was doing well at an age when most young men were glad to have survived the rigors of their testing for bar mitzvah. But no, he knew things inside and out. And he had questions for them, and they had questions for him, and they were amazed. Now, move forward to current times, and what happens if a child or young adult does well in a school science fair? What happens if somebody does well in a school science fair? Does extremely well. Maybe does well beyond anything that you would expect. Well, guess what? They get the interest of people who are in that business. So wouldn't it follow that perhaps if Joseph of Arimathea was one of those people in the temple at the time, that Joseph of Arimathea and a few others would be taking an interest in this young guy named Jesus? And there is a story that Joseph of Arimathea did take Jesus with him to Britain many years before that, not long after the finding in the temple. Now, mind you, from age 13 or 12, however you want to count it, till traditionally we say age 30, when he was baptized by John the Baptist, you've got this long gap where nothing is written about him. A trip to Britain would be not implausible, especially if, as some say, Joseph of Arimathea had an interest in the tin business. Tin was very important all over the Roman Empire, including in Judea, and one of the places you went to get tin, one of the better places to get tin, was in Britain. And so, we have that. We also know, as I said, that the Thomas, the infamous Doubting Thomas, went to India. But there's also a story during this interim period about a young monk named Isa from Judea, who was studying in a monastery in Tibet. Why not? Wasn't that far off the Silk Road? And the Silk Road went all the way from the Pacific Ocean through Judea and to Rome. The Silk Road. And Nazareth was basically a truck stop on the Silk Road. That was the main thing that Nazareth did, was support the traffic on the Silk Road. So, yeah, all this can fit together. And then there is an additional story about Philip. Now, the funny thing about Thomas and Philip, Thomas we hear about as Doubting Thomas. And there are people who criticize Philip because just before Jesus pulled off the miracle of the loaves and fishes, Thomas was the one who, Philip was the one who said, only 200 penny worth of bread to feed everybody just a little. Well, first off, they were a great distance away from any stores anyway, but you're talking about a typical person's 2 years' worth of working wages. So, how are they going to pull that off? And people criticize, well, the fact is that Philip was not being a critic. He wasn't being a doubter. He was saying a matter of fact. That's how much it would cost for everybody to have just a little. Well, everybody got to eat their fill. But what happened to Philip after the crucifixion and the resurrection? Well, Omnic Gaudium in partis tres divididum est, the opening lines of a book by Julius Caesar, who died half a century before Christ. All of Gaul is divided into 3 parts. And as much attention as was being given to Gaul, why is it we don't have any real record of apostles going to Gaul? Well, there is, but it's not canonical, which doesn't mean it's not true. It just means that it's not been accepted as part of the canon. That Philip went to Gaul, which isn't to say that he stayed there, but he did some stuff there. And some of what's been written about Joseph of Arimathea say that he was the one who actually sent Joseph of Arimathea onward toward Glastonbury. I don't know that Joseph needed that much of a prod, especially if he'd been there before. And there's even a story about a chapel having been there that was initially consecrated by Jesus himself as a rather young man. So who knows? Yes, I've jumped between history and supposition and a bit of legend, and why not? Because at the heart of every legend there will be a kernel of truth. We just don't necessarily know what it is or its exact nature, but there had to have been something there for there to be something about it. And we have Glastonbury as a place where quite a number of religions were able to work together well. Bear in mind that Glastonbury itself dates back to, we know for sure, the Neolithic period, otherwise known as the New Stone Age. And during that time they had paved roads, yes, timber paving, but the fact is there were paved roads, and nobody was writing history books, but there they were. And Glastonbury had been a spiritual center for a long time before anybody Christian came there. And they all seemed to get along with each other. And I think we can take a lesson from that. There's something that we can learn. If we can actually learn to work together and grow together, yeah, can you imagine what we're going to be able to do? I might, and blessed be. This has been a presentation of the Wise Ones Net. Merry part and blessed be.